So our next project we're going to work on is Morrison the Moose. This is a quilt I designed a couple years ago using the Moose on the Loose fabric from Quilting Treasures. The fabric is adorable. It has these lovely little moose driving and skating and playing instruments and stuff. And I was going to go on in a cruise to Alaska, and Stitch in Heaven asked me to design a quilt that was representative to Alaska. So I designed a moose quilt. We ended up going with a very different quilt that's much more grown up. It's called Northern Lights, and that one is also on our website, and it is stunning. But this guy really talked to me. So we kept Morrison the Moose for our own pattern line, and I cut all the pieces a few years ago and just never got a chance to make it. And so now I'm finally pulling it out and getting it made. And we have all our fabrics cut and labeled. I recommend when you do cut a project to label them. I have these little label stickers I use to label everything. It sure makes it a lot easier if you put it away like I did for years and then pull it back out to get going rather quickly versus having to sort through everything. There's a lot of cream in this. It's a pieced cream back. So what I did for that one is I wrote the sizes on all the pieces so that I won't accidentally pick up a 2 5/8 inch square thinking it's a 3-inch square. So this will also keep you more organized and a little easier, especially when you have a project with lots of different pieces that are close in size. So now that we've got everything cut and labeled and we're ready to make our Morrison the Moose quilts, we're going to start here in the center, and the first thing we're doing is these checkerboard top and bottom units, and we're going to do that by strip piecing. And if you haven't done strip piecing before, you take 2 strips of fabric. These are cut 1 3/4 inch. You're going to pair them up and sew them together lengthwise, and then we're going to come back and cut them into segments. So I'm going to get these sewn, and I'll be back to show you how we cut them into segments. So I am marking my squares for my flying geese, and that's the border on the quilt. So for the flying geese, you would normally take a ruler and go point to point and draw a line, but then you're only measuring from point to point, and it's not very accurate. So my favorite method to marking flying geese is to take a ruler like this that has the 1/4 inch built into the 45-degree angle. I use this ruler, which is the folded corner clipper from Creative Grids, or I use the non-slip multi-size 6-inch flying geese and 45-90-degree triangle ruler from Creative Grids. Either ruler will work. I use this ruler, the bigger ruler, for lots of other things like Hasker triangles and flying geese, and I know I have some videos out there showing how I use it. But for little squares, this little guy works well. And I'm sorry, this ruler is from Prairie Sky Quilting. Creative Grids also makes a version of this. So you just align the ruler with the top of the square, the side of the square, and then the 3-inch line on the bottom. So we're doing this, we're aligning here, and then we're drawing a line. That is much more accurate than trying to catch this point and this point floating in space. So when you go to put these on your flying geese, on your rectangles, the smaller triangle always points out. So, and then when I sew, I am sewing from point to point, but my 1/4 inch foot edge will ride along the line, and then it'll just flip right open perfectly for you. I have found this to be the most accurate way to do any kind of sew and flip or flip and sew or flying geese, whatever you call it. So I'm going to sit here and finish marking all of these. I just have a couple more to go. Alright, so we are ready to start assembling our Morrison the Moose pattern. This is the cute little guy we're making. I cut this a couple years ago, and I'm now finally getting to make it, and I'm so excited. So let's see how it goes together. We're going to start with the checkerboard. So the first thing we're going to do is strip piecing. And what strip piecing is you cut the fabric, in this case 1 3/4 by length of fabric. You have 2 strips of different colors. Sometimes you'll have 3 or 4 strips for strip piecing. And you literally follow the picture and sew this strip to this strip. And then we're going to come back and we're going to cut it into segments. So this just makes it a quicker and easier way. You just have to line up 2 long strips and then we'll cut versus having to line up all the little squares, which we'll get to do a little bit later. But so I'm going to go sew these and then I'll be back to cut the segments. Okay, so now I have the strips sewn together, pressed them towards the red, and this is the one thing with strip piecing that I see a lot out there that you have to be cautious of, is when you're pressing this over, make sure the fabric doesn't roll in the seam. I see people do this and there's like 1/8 of an inch of fabric stuck in there. You want the whole seam to lay nice and flat. Press all the strip sets the same way. So if this goes to the red, these should go to the red. Once we have them cut, we're creating a 4 patch. So you could lay the strips, 2 strips, right sides together. And you should be able to nest that seam because you pressed it in the same direction. And then you take a small ruler, and the instructions say to cut 1 3/4 inch segments. So I align a ruler on the sewn line of the strip set, clip off the end to get rid of the mismatched edges, and then I flip the strip set over. And I'm going to cut 1 3/4 inch segments. And again, I align a horizontal line on the ruler to the sewn line of the strip set. And I cut. So now I have 2 units right sides together. And if I took them to the machine and sewed a 1/4 inch right now and I opened this up, I would have my 4 patch. So you don't have to like cut them individually and then align them. If you do it this way, that work is all done. You just cut them. And what I like to do is I take a ruler to use as a tray, and I'll just stack them up and I'll take them over and I'll sew them. Just make sure that they are going the way the picture says. They're not like this, that they're like this. So the gold is on the upper left and the lower right. So cut one, check it. If it's not right, flip the strip set over and cut them, and that should get you the right orientation. And I need to cut 35 of these. So I'll get these cut and sewn, and I'll be back for the next step. Alright, so I've got all of these little guys sewn together. And they make the little 4 patches. I want to show you the Cutting Gizmo. It's from the Gypsy Quilter. We have these on our website. And it's perfect for when you chain sew. It has a straight edge blade in there, but it's recessed so you can't cut your finger. You can push it out and replace it when it gets dull, but you can't do anything to hurt yourself there. You can take these and you just pop them over the blade, and it's so much easier on your wrist than trying to do it with scissors. So if you do a lot of chain piecing like me, you need a Cutting Gizmo. Okay, now I'm going to take these over. We'll get them ironed. You can iron them. You can twist, you can push one side to the other, one side that way, one side this way, but if you open that center, you get that little 4 patch and it'll give you less bulk in the middle. So I'm going to take them over, get them all pressed, and then we're going to be ready to make these 2 big units. So I have all of my little 4 patches done. So now we're going to need to make these units, and they're mirror image of each other. So that's where all of these pieces come in, and they're all labeled. So we need 3 inches. There's lots of cream here. It really helps to label these so that you don't have to measure them every time you need to find the pieces. So there we go, 3 by 5.5. Now that we've got this one laid out, I'm going to sew these together, these together, these together, these together, and these together. So you want to either press everything towards the cream or everything towards the 4 patch. I'm going to press towards the cream because I don't have a seam and it'll be flatter. It won't be as bulky as if I press towards the 4 patch. So we'll sew these together and come back with the finished unit, and then we'll do that one. So there is block 1. Now I'm going to make, or unit 3, I'll make unit 4. Okay, we're going to go ahead and sew these, and then we'll have the mirror block, which is unit 4. Alright, so there's unit 4. So you can see unit 3 and unit 4 are the same, just mirror image. They're going to go in the bottom corners of our background block. So next we need to make the top braid. So we'll set those aside for now. And that involves taking 17 of these, which I assume is what I got left, and putting a 1 3/4 3-inch bottom strip. I always recommend counting out and not just guessing you have it, because you'll never know if you're short or if you have too many, and then you have to rip seams, which is never fun. So that's 5, that's 10, 15, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 15, 16, 17. So we're going to go sew these on here, and we're going to press them towards the cream. Okay, so we need to sew 9 of these and 8 of these. This will be 5A, this will be 5B. So 9 and 8. Alright, so we have these sewn and these sewn. They're mirror image of each other again. And we are at this strip here. So we start with one of these. We're going to just keep sewing them to create the checkerboard. And then you need a 2 by 4 1/4 on each end. So we're going to sew the strips, sew the short ones on, sew the long ones on. Everything will be pressed to the background. Alright, so I have the strip sewn, and I've sewn the little 2-inch by 4 1/4 inch strip on each end. And now I need to sew a 1 1/2 inch by 46 inch strip at the top and 1 3/4 by 46 at the bottom. These are only 42 inches because they're cut with the fabric. So how you do this is you take your strip and you're going to sew them end to end with a diagonal seam. So you put them like this, right sides together, and you're going to sew from here to here. So you'll sew from point to point, and then you'll flip it open, and that will create a diagonal seam. The reason we do borders on diagonal seams is your eye will actually skip over a diagonal seam much easier than a straight seam. So when you're doing borders or strips or anything, if you don't want to draw attention to your seam, you would do a diagonal. If you don't like doing it this way, you can do a straight seam. We just write it using a diagonal. So I'm going to sew these 2 together and these 2 together. We'll pin it on. You always want to pin your borders on because You don't, the fabric goes through the machine at 2 different speeds. You have the feed dogs on the bottom pulling this one, and then this one glides. If you don't pin it, you can gather fabric in your seam and make it ripple. So you always want to pin things longer than 12 inches, and these are definitely longer than that. So I'm going to go ahead, get these pressed, pinned, and sewn, and we will have our unit 6 done. So here is the top background border, checkerboard border, all ready to go. So we'll put that up there with the other units. And we are ready to start building the moose, which I can't wait for. That's what I've been waiting for. So there's going to be a lot of just one little pieces here and there. A lot of it's going to be mirror image, ton of flip and sew, which I'll show you how to do. And in the end, we will have the cutest moose. Right there. He'll be just adorable. So let's get cracking. First up, we're going to be making his ears. Alright, to mark your diagonals, usually you would go from point to point. You would just draw a line with a straight edge and go point to point. This is not a very accurate way to do it, so how I do it is I use a folded corner clipper and I lay it on the square, and I align this edge with the square, this edge with the square, and this edge with the square. And I draw the line along here. What this does is it gives me 3 points to measure versus 2 floating points. And we're gonna still sew on the diagonal, but my 1/4 inch foot will go on this square. So for this one, these are mirror image, so they're gonna be opposites. This one, smaller triangle, goes out. So I want it to flip this way, so the smaller triangle goes that way. I'm going to, it'll go through my machine like this, sew on the diagonal, and put the 1/4 inch foot on there. So that is that one. Mark this guy. And this is a friction pen that will just iron away. We have these on our website. I use them to mark all the backside pieces because it's so much easier to see than a pencil. And then this is going to be unit 8, so this one goes on this side, so they're opposite. I'm going to sew here, flip this one, sew here, flip this one. Then once those are done, we'll put the 3.5 inch square on the opposite corner. So here and here. So we're going to mark those the same. So this will go this way, and this will go this way, and it'll be pressed out that way. Then we'll come back and we'll put the little brown ones on after these are sewn, cut, and pressed. So I'll bring them back over here to show you that before we put these on, but these also get marked. Anything that's sewn across the diagonal, you will mark this way. There we go. So we'll be back when these are sewn on. Okay, so now I've sewn these, and I've sewn on the diagonal, and then you flip this out and press it, flip that out and press it, so it looks like this. And then you can either cut just the cream away, and leave the black so you could use that edge as a edge to follow, or you can cut, if it matches, which this matches, which this method helps you match, you can just cut both layers away to get rid of the thickness, and you can do it that way. I tend to do this method over leaving this guy here. And you can use a straight edge and a rotary cutter and measure, but it's, as long as you leave about a 1/4 inch behind there, you're good. So there's that one. And this looks like this. We put the little square here. We're going to sew from point to point and flip this out. And that will be one moose ear. And then on this one, once I've pressed it, you need to trim and press before you do the opposite corners because you're going to sew right over where you have already done a piece. So let's get rid of this. And then we're going to put this guy here, and that will give us our right moose ear. So we'll finish these up and then be back to put the whole section together. Okay, so here is my left ear and my right ear. And now we're going to sew a 5.5 by 9.5 rectangle on either side. So there's that one. And then this guy gets over here. And then on the bottom is a 10.5 by 15.5. And that goes there. And there. And then our ear units will be done. So I'll be back when those are sewn. Alright, so here are the Unit 9 and Unit 10 ear units. So we'll put those aside. And now we're up to, what we're going to do is beard. Alright, so we have all these units done. So the beard is this guy with this, and then followed by this, and then there. So that's going to create the beard, and then we sew a 2.5 by 10.5 inch strip on either side. And that will finish the beard unit, which is Unit 17. There we go. So we'll sew that together and come back and make the next part. So now that we've got the quilt center of Morrison the Moose done, I wanted to show it to you. It was getting a little too big for the cutting table. So now we're moving on to the pieced border that's going to go around it. It's got flying geese and flowers. And then we will show it to you again. Alright, so we have our quilt center done, which I just shared with you. Now we need to do the pieced border that goes around the moose head. And this involves a bunch of flying geese and these 6 little pieced flowers. So we're going to work on the flowers next. And that is these squares, these squares, these squares, and these squares, and then a whole bunch of these. You can see how our cream pile has reduced to almost nothing now because we've got the moose pretty much put together. So we're running out of parts, which means we're almost done. Alright, so first step is to take these. We need 16 of them, and we need to put one little square on this corner, and then 3 of these guys on each corner. And then for these guys, they get a red square in the corner and a cream square on each. 1, 2, 3. So I need to mark all of these, flip and sew them on, and then do it 16 times, and then I'll be back with the units all done. Alright, so now I've got these all pressed. That one and that one. Now I need to put a cream square on the opposite sides. And then we'll have each petal of our flower done. So we'll do that, and then I'll come back when they're all pressed open. Okay, so now I've got all the little blocks sewn onto the big box. And you're gonna take 4 of these, sew them together, and that will make our red flower. And this one will make the yellow flower. So I'm gonna go ahead and make these flowers. I'm gonna end up with 4 of each, and then we'll be ready to do the flying geese for the other half of the border. Okay, so I've got these sewn, and because there's going to be so many layers, if I press it to one side or the other, I'm going to go ahead and press this seam open. So how I do that is I use a strip stick. This is a strip stick. This is the longer one of the two. I think it's the 18. It's the 18-inch stick. We sell these on our website, and I use our purple Thang, and I lay them out on the stick. And I would do this at the ironing board, but I'm going to show you here what I do. And I take the end of the purple Thang and I just push this open, and then I would take an iron, and you just take the iron and it'll press it right open, and because it's a curve, the seam opens right up. It's much easier than trying to press the seam open on the ironing board flat. So we're going to press all of these open, and then we'll sew them together to make the 4 patch for the flowers. Alright, so we've got all our little flowers done, and now we need to move on to the flying geese sections. And I've gone ahead and marked all of the rectangle, or all the squares. Now, aren't these guys the cutest? They're just moose on the loose. And so these are all my flying geese rectangles and all my squares. So we're going to do the same thing we've been doing throughout. We'll put this on, sew on this side, trim and press. Then we'll put this on, sew on this side, trim and press. So we're going to go ahead and lay all these out. And another trick is I like to use a big square ruler as a tray, and I usually find a nice comfy spot, and I layer all these up onto the ruler, and then I just take them over to the machine and they just slide off onto my table so I can start sewing. And I usually will lay them up the way the orientation of when they go in the sewing machine. So we'll just do this and we'll be ready to make our flying geese. So just like that. We'll be back. Alright, so I've sewn the first half of the flying geese on. So now we need to trim them up and press them, and then we can do the second half. So I use the same line on my cutting mat trick, and we're going to lay these out, trim them up, and we'll be ready to do the other side. Okay, so now these are all pressed, and we need to put the other side on. So when you put this on here, you'll see how it overlaps right there. That's why you press this first before you do this one. Okay, we're ready to sew the next side in. Alright, these are sewn. Now we're going to trim and press, and we'll have all our flying geese for the border. So we have all the flying geese done, and now there's 16 of each of those. So we're going to sew one of these together to create 16 4-block segments. Then we can piece them all together to create the borders. So I'll sew these and I'll come back and show you the first border. So now we've got the 4 different ones sewn together, and now we're going to make the border, the pieced border that goes around the quilt. So it's this to this, this, and I'm only going to show you half because my table is only so long. So this is the center, then this, and then the yellow ones go in the corner. So on the other side we'll flip it. So I'll sew this and we'll be back to show you the borders and get them put on the quilt. So I have the whole center done. I have the black border on and the white border on. I have the pieced borders put together, which will go on next, followed by another cream border, followed by our cute moose on the loose, another moose on the loose border fabric. I've gone ahead and pieced all of these with a diagonal seam, and how you do that is you put them one going this way, one going this way, and you sew from corner to corner, cut off the extra, and flip it open. It'll make this seam a little more invisible. When you look at the finished quilt, it's not as obvious as a straight seam. So that is sewn on a diagonal seam. So I'm going to finish putting the quilt top together, and it'll be ready to go off to the quilter. Alright, here is Morrison the Moose. He is all pieced and ready to go to the quilter. We're going to have Benet quilt this one. You can see all the little pieced border. Oh, there's my footstool. And there he is. So we'll take another video when he comes back from the quilter. So here is Morrison the Moose back from Benet. She was the quilter on this one, Benet Pulls. She did a great job on this guy. He is definitely a favorite of mine. So she quilted him, let's see if I can get up close. She quilted flowers and vines all around his antlers. So he looks like he's bursting through a flower garden. She did some outside. She just did parallel lines on the border. So here is our Morrison the Moose quilt. I hope you've enjoyed the quilting tutorial on how to make him. He is a very fun quilt to make, and I look forward to seeing any comments below, and add a picture if you make them. And I thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, make sure you like and subscribe below. You can find the Whimsical Workshop on our website, thewhimsicalworkshop.com, and that has all links to all of our other social media platforms. Thanks for joining us.